The moment the accusation happened, the entire luxury watch store seemed to freeze in place, as if time itself had stopped out of shock. The boutique, Montrose and Vale, sat on the most expensive stretch of Fifth Avenue, where marble floors gleamed beneath crystal chandeliers and glass display cases held watches worth more than most people's houses. Soft classical music floated through the air, mixing with the low hum of whispered conversations and the polite footsteps of wealthy customers browsing casually, unbothered by price tags. In the center of it all stood 13-year-old Eli Carter, his hands shoved nervously into the pockets of his faded hoodie, his eyes wide as he gazed in awe at the shining mechanical masterpieces behind the glass. He had never seen anything like them in real life, timepieces made of gold, platinum, and diamonds, tiny gears spinning with microscopic precision, every piece engineered to perfection. For Eli, who loved machines and dreamed of becoming an engineer one day, this place felt like a museum of impossible beauty. He wasn't there to touch anything. He wasn't there to steal. He was just there to look. But in that moment, none of that mattered. Because suddenly, a sharp voice sliced through the calm atmosphere like a blade. "Security! Get over here. Now." The words echoed loudly, turning every head in the store toward the source. Standing behind the main counter was Victoria Harrington, the store's manager, tall and elegant in her tailored blazer, her platinum blonde hair pulled back so tightly it looked painful. Her eyes were cold, calculating, and locked directly onto Eli. She raised a manicured finger and pointed straight at him. "That one," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "He's trying to steal." A heavy silence slammed into the room. Customers stiffened. Sales associates froze. Even the music seemed to fade into nothing. Eli's stomach dropped. His heart began pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. "What?" he whispered, confused. "Don't play dumb," Victoria snapped, already walking toward him in sharp, deliberate steps. "I watched you hovering near the Patek Philippe display for over 5 minutes. Kids like you don't wander into stores like this unless you're planning something." Eli shook his head, panic rising in his chest. "I was just looking. I swear. My mom is right across the street. She told me to wait here." Victoria let out a thin, humorless laugh. "Of course she did. And I suppose she's a billionaire too." A ripple of uncomfortable murmurs spread through the boutique. A man in a navy suit frowned. A woman clutching a designer handbag pulled it closer to her chest. 2 security guards in black uniforms began moving toward Eli, their heavy footsteps echoing ominously on the marble floor. "Empty your pockets," Victoria ordered. Eli stared at her, stunned. "What?" "Now," she snapped. His hands trembled as he slowly reached into his hoodie and pulled out a folded bus pass, a half-eaten granola bar, and 2 crumpled dollar bills. He opened his palms, showing there was nothing else. For a brief moment, doubt flickered across Victoria's face, but it vanished almost instantly, replaced by irritation. "Check his backpack," she said coldly. "I don't even." Before he could finish, one of the guards yanked the small, worn backpack from his shoulders and dumped its contents onto the floor. Notebooks spilled out. A cracked phone skidded across the marble. A library book slid to a stop near the counter, its cover reading Advanced Robotics and Engineering in bold letters. Pencils, loose papers, and a folded robotics competition flyer scattered everywhere. A few customers stared at the mess in awkward silence. One teenage girl near the back whispered, "That's messed up," but her voice was quickly drowned out. Victoria barely glanced at the items. "Search him again," she said sharply. Eli felt heat rush to his face. His throat tightened, his eyes burning. "I didn't take anything," he whispered. The guard roughly patted him down anyway. Another customer lifted a phone, quietly recording. Someone else followed. Within seconds, multiple cameras were pointed at him. "You people always try this," Victoria muttered. "Sneaking into places you don't belong, hoping to grab something small and slip out unnoticed." "I wasn't trying to take anything," Eli said, his voice cracking despite his effort to stay strong. "I just like how the watches work." That earned him a few scattered laughs. "Oh, that's rich," a man near the register scoffed. "Kid's suddenly a watch expert." Victoria crossed her arms. Trying to steal a watch worth more than your entire family's future, she sneered. You should be ashamed. The words cut deeper than any slap ever could. Eli's chest tightened, his breathing shallow. He had never felt so small. Around him, people whispered, judged, stared. Some shook their heads. Others looked away, uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. And then, without warning, a hand grabbed his arm. You're coming with us, one guard said firmly. Let go of me, Eli protested weakly. I didn't do anything. Victoria waved dismissively. Get him out of my store before he causes more trouble. As they dragged him toward the exit, his cracked phone slipped from his pocket and skidded across the floor. Nobody picked it up. Nobody said a word. The glass doors swung open, cold air rushing in, and suddenly Eli was outside, shoved onto the sidewalk like yesterday's trash. Behind him, the doors closed quietly, sealing him out. Inside, life resumed as if nothing had happened. But outside, Eli stood trembling, tears finally spilling down his cheeks, humiliated, confused, and broken, unaware that what had just happened inside that glittering store was about to unleash a chain of events that would shake every life connected to it, and that by this time tomorrow, the sky itself would thunder as a billionaire's helicopter descended in search of justice. Eli didn't cry until he reached the end of the block, where the glittering storefronts gave way to busy traffic and noisy sidewalks, and the sound of honking horns drowned out the echoes of humiliation still ringing in his ears. He leaned against a cold metal lamppost, his small chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven breaths, his hands shaking as he tried to steady himself. People passed by without noticing. A man brushed past his shoulder without a glance. A woman stepped around him, annoyed at the obstruction. To them, he was just another kid in a hoodie on a crowded street. They couldn't see the storm raging inside him. His throat burned as he fought back sobs, refusing to let himself completely break down in public. His mother always told him, "Be strong, baby. The world won't be gentle with you, so you have to be stronger than it." But in that moment, strength felt impossible. His phone was gone, lost somewhere inside the boutique, and his backpack had been dumped onto the floor like trash. All he had left was the hollow ache in his chest and the crushing weight of shame. When his mother finally emerged from the bank across the street, counting the small stack of bills in her hand, her smile vanished the second she saw his face. "Eli," she said, rushing toward him. "What happened?" He tried to speak, but the words tangled in his throat. She wrapped her arms around him instinctively, pulling him into her chest as he finally broke, tears soaking into her jacket. "They said I stole something," he whispered. "They searched me. Everybody was staring." Danielle Carter felt her heart shatter. She held her son tighter, anger and heartbreak flooding her veins at the same time. She had spent her entire life working to protect him from moments like this, to build a small shield around his innocence in a world that was far too eager to strip it away. And yet, it had happened anyway. That night, their tiny apartment felt quieter than usual. Eli sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at his spilled notebooks, while his mother reheated leftover rice and beans, though neither of them had much of an appetite. He barely touched his food. His mind replayed the scene again and again: Victoria's accusing finger, the guard's rough hands, the laughter, the whispers. He wondered if maybe he really did look like someone who didn't belong. He wondered if the world would always see him this way, no matter how hard he tried, no matter how smart he became. His mother sat across from him, watching every flicker of emotion cross his face, her jaw clenched in silent fury. "You did nothing wrong," she said firmly. "Nothing. Don't ever let anyone make you believe otherwise." Eli nodded, but doubt lingered. The next morning, he woke to the buzz of his mother's phone vibrating endlessly on the counter. Messages. Notifications. Missed calls. When she finally checked, her eyes widened. Someone had posted a video of the incident online. Within hours, it had spread across social media, drawing millions of views and sparking outrage across the country. Headlines flooded timelines. Luxury watch store accused of profiling black child. Teen humiliated in Fifth Avenue boutique. Shocking footage sparks nationwide debate. Some comments were supportive, filled with empathy and rage. Others were cruel, dismissive, and filled with the same ugly assumptions Eli had faced inside the store. Danielle read them all, her heart aching with every word. Montrose and Vale released a brief statement by midday, carefully crafted and painfully cold. We regret any discomfort experienced. Our staff followed standard security procedures to protect high-value inventory. No apology. No acknowledgement of wrongdoing. No concern for the boy they had publicly humiliated. When reporters tried to contact the store, they were met with silence. When they called corporate offices, they were directed to voicemail. Victoria Harrington herself gave a brief comment outside the boutique, her expression unbothered. "We handle merchandise worth millions," she said flatly. "Precautions are necessary." To her, the incident was already over. But to Eli, it was just beginning. By evening, the video had reached international news outlets. His face was everywhere. His pain replayed endlessly. Teachers called to check on him. His robotics coach sent messages of support. Even strangers reached out, offering words of kindness and encouragement. But nothing erased the humiliation. Nothing quieted the voice inside him whispering that he didn't belong. That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the cracked ceiling, his father's face drifting through his thoughts. His dad, Marcus Carter, had always told him, "Never let anyone decide your worth. That's your job." Marcus had been a man of quiet strength, a former soldier who rarely spoke about the war, but who carried its scars in his eyes. He had died 6 years earlier from complications related to injuries he'd never fully recovered from. Eli barely remembered the details, only that his father had once saved a man's life in combat, pulling him from a burning vehicle under enemy fire. The man had promised to always look out for his family. But after Marcus passed, that promise seemed to fade into silence, buried beneath time and distance. Or so Eli thought. Across the city, in a glass-walled penthouse overlooking the Hudson River, a man stood in silence, staring at the same viral video playing on a massive screen. Adrian Cross. Tech titan. Defense contractor. Billionaire visionary. A man who commanded entire industries with a single phone call. His jaw tightened as he watched the footage again, the fear in Eli's eyes, the guards dumping his belongings, the manager's cold disdain. Adrian's fists slowly clenched. "Pause it," he said quietly. The image froze on Eli's face. Adrian turned to his assistant, his voice dangerously calm. "That boy is Marcus Carter's son." The room fell silent. His assistant swallowed. "Sir, are you certain?" Adrian nodded once. "I'd recognize that face anywhere. His father saved my life. That child should never have been treated like this." He exhaled slowly, a storm brewing behind his eyes. "Find out everything. Who accused him? Who owns that store? Who signed the franchise license? I want names. I want contracts. I want leverage." His assistant typed furiously. "And prepare the helicopter," Adrian added. "I'm going to Manhattan in the morning." As the night deepened, Eli lay awake in his small bedroom, unaware that powerful forces were already shifting in response to his pain, that gears far larger than any watch mechanism were beginning to turn, and that by this time tomorrow, the sky above Fifth Avenue would thunder with the sound of incoming justice. By the next morning, the atmosphere inside Montrose and Vale felt nothing like the pristine, calm luxury sanctuary it usually projected. The air was thick with anxiety, humming with unease beneath the soft classical music and polished marble floors. Sales associates whispered in corners, their eyes darting nervously toward the front entrance every time the door opened. Corporate emails flooded the store's internal systems, each more urgent than the last. Customer cancellations stacked up. VIP appointments were abruptly withdrawn. Longtime clients quietly redirected their business to rival boutiques, unwilling to be associated with scandal. And yet, standing in the center of it all, Victoria Harrington remained defiant. She paced behind the counter, her heels clicking sharply against the floor, issuing clipped commands and snapping at employees for the smallest mistakes. "Focus," she barked. "We are not losing our professionalism because of one unfortunate misunderstanding." But beneath her rigid posture and icy composure, A flicker of unease had begun to take root. She could feel it, pressing against the back of her mind. Something about the intensity of the backlash felt different. Usually, scandals burned hot and faded quickly. But this one refused to cool. It spread, multiplied, deepened. Every hour brought more negative headlines. Every minute brought more angry messages. Still, Victoria clung to her certainty. She had done nothing wrong. She had protected company assets. She had followed protocol. And in her world, that justification was enough. Just before noon, her assistant hurried toward her, face pale. "Ma'am," she whispered urgently, "corporate is on line 3. They want an immediate update." Victoria exhaled sharply and snatched the phone. "This has gone far enough," she snapped into the receiver. "We released a statement. We followed procedure. What more do they want?" A tense pause followed. Her expression slowly shifted. Her jaw tightened. "I understand, but we can't just..." She fell silent, listening. Then quietly, "Very well." She hung up, her fingers trembling slightly. For the first time, doubt crept into her confidence. Corporate had instructed her to prepare a full incident report, complete security footage, employee statements, and customer records. Not routine. Not normal. That level of scrutiny meant someone powerful was paying attention. And powerful people didn't tolerate embarrassment. Across the city, in a mirrored skyscraper overlooking Central Park, Adrian Cross's private command center buzzed with controlled urgency. Lawyers, analysts, security experts, and corporate strategists moved in swift, efficient coordination, dissecting every detail of Montrose and Vale's operations. Franchise agreements were pulled. Ownership structures mapped. Financial vulnerabilities identified. They're operating under a licensing contract held by Cross Meridian Holdings, an analyst reported. "Your company owns the controlling interest." Adrian nodded. Which means you can terminate the license for ethical violations." Adrian's lips curved slightly. "Good." He turned to his assistant. "Prepare the helicopter. I want to be on 5th Avenue within the hour." Back in his apartment, Eli sat quietly on his bed, his robotics notebook balanced on his knees, though he hadn't written a single line. His mind wandered in restless loops, replaying the humiliation, the looks, the whispers. His mother sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through updates, her expression tight with worry. She hated that her son's pain had become public entertainment, that strangers dissected his life from behind screens. When she finally set her phone down, she walked into his room and sat beside him. "You don't have to be strong all the time," she said gently. "It's okay to be scared." Eli nodded, his voice barely audible. "I just wanted to look at the watches." She brushed his hair softly. "One day," she whispered, "you'll build things that make those watches look simple." At exactly 9:47 a.m., the sky above 5th Avenue vibrated with a deep, thunderous hum. The sound rolled through the streets like distant thunder, drawing startled glances from pedestrians and office workers alike. Conversations faltered. Traffic slowed. People shaded their eyes, searching the sky. A massive, matte black helicopter emerged between towering skyscrapers, descending in smooth, controlled arcs toward the private rooftop landing pad of the adjacent building. Its sleek frame bore a silver insignia, a crowned falcon, instantly recognizable to anyone familiar with the world of elite industry. Within seconds, black SUVs rolled onto the block, forming a seamless security perimeter. Suited men stepped out, scanning the crowd, murmuring into earpieces. Phones shot into the air. "Is that Adrian Cross?" someone whispered. Inside Montrose and Vale, the vibrations rattled the glass displays. Customers turned in alarm. Sales associates froze. Victoria stepped forward, irritation flashing across her face. "What is that noise?" Her assistant hurried to the window, eyes widening. "Ma'am, it's a helicopter." Victoria scoffed. "This isn't a helipad." Then she saw it. The aircraft's shadow swept across the storefront, plunging the boutique into momentary darkness. A knot tightened in her stomach. Something was wrong. Moments later, the front doors opened. Not with their usual gentle chime, but in complete, reverent silence, as though the entire store had collectively stopped breathing. A tall man stepped inside, flanked by security. His presence alone commanded attention. Conversations died instantly. Every head turned. Even those unfamiliar with his face felt the weight of his authority. Adrian Cross moved with calm precision, his gaze scanning the room before settling on Victoria. She straightened instinctively, smoothing her blazer, forcing a polished smile. "Welcome to Montrose and Vale," she said, stepping forward. "How may I assist you?" Adrian didn't return her smile. His eyes were cold, unreadable. "I'm looking for a boy," he said quietly. The words cut through the silence like a blade. Victoria blinked. "Excuse me?" "A 13-year-old child," Adrian continued. "You accused him of theft yesterday." A hush swept the room. Victoria felt blood drain from her face. "I'm not sure what you mean," she said carefully. Adrian turned to his assistant, who tapped her tablet. The screen filled with the viral footage, Eli's humiliation playing in crisp, merciless detail. Every whisper, every accusation, every cruel glance. The store seemed to shrink around them. Adrian's voice dropped dangerously low. "That boy," he said, eyes locked on Victoria, "is the son of the man who saved my life. And today, I intend to make sure you understand exactly what that means." The silence inside Montrose and Vale felt unnatural, as though the air itself had frozen in anticipation. Customers stood motionless, breath caught in their throats, eyes darting between the towering figure of Adrian Cross and the suddenly pale, rigid form of Victoria Harrington. No one dared speak. No one even seemed to blink. Adrian took a slow step forward, his polished shoes clicking sharply against the marble floor, the sound echoing through the boutique like the ticking of a massive clock counting down someone's fate. Victoria forced herself to hold his gaze, though every instinct inside her screamed danger. "Sir," she said carefully, "if there has been a misunderstanding, I assure you, there was no misunderstanding," Adrian interrupted, his voice calm but lethal. "There was bias. There was humiliation. And there was cruelty." He gestured subtly, and one of his security officers stepped forward, handing him a tablet. With a single motion, Adrian turned the screen outward, projecting the viral footage onto the store's massive display panel, the same one usually reserved for showcasing limited edition timepieces. Eli's terrified face filled the screen, larger than life. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The video played in full, unedited sequence, Victoria's sharp accusation, the guards rifling through Eli's belongings, the whispered insults from customers, the boy's cracked voice as he tried to defend himself, and finally, the moment he was shoved out onto the sidewalk, discarded. When the footage ended, the silence that followed was deafening. Adrian turned back to Victoria. "That boy is named Eli Carter," he said. "And his father, Marcus Carter, dragged me out of a burning armored vehicle in Kandahar while bullets were still flying. He shielded my body with his own and carried me half a mile to safety." Victoria swallowed hard. "I didn't know," she whispered. Adrian's expression didn't change. "No," he replied. "You didn't care." He took another step forward. "You saw a black child in worn clothes and decided his presence was a threat. You didn't ask his name. You didn't ask why he was there. You didn't ask anything. You chose humiliation." A bead of sweat slid down Victoria's temple. "We handle inventory worth millions," she said weakly. "We have protocols. Protocols do not include cruelty," Adrian snapped, his voice rising for the first time. "Nor do they justify stripping a child of dignity." The assistant beside him tapped her tablet again. "Montrose and Vale operates under a franchise agreement held by Cross Meridian Holdings," she announced. Murmurs rippled through the boutique. Adrian nodded. "Which means," he continued, "this store operates because I allow it to." Victoria's knees weakened. "As of this moment," Adrian said calmly, "that permission is revoked." The words hit like a gunshot. "What?" Victoria gasped. "Your franchise license is terminated," he continued. "Your corporate accounts are frozen pending investigation. Your employment is terminated for cause." Her mouth opened, but no sound emerged. "Additionally," Adrian added, You are being personally sued for discrimination, emotional distress, and violation of civil rights. Every recording from yesterday will be entered as evidence." Around them, whispers erupted. Phones discreetly lifted. Employees stared in disbelief. Victoria shook her head frantically. "Please, you can't. I've worked here for 15 years, and in 15 years, Adrian said coldly, you learned nothing about humanity." He turned slightly. "Escort her out." 2 security officers stepped forward. Victoria staggered backward. "You can't do this," she whispered. "You're destroying my life." Adrian's eyes were merciless. "No," he replied. "You destroyed your own." As the guards took her arms, the doors opened again. This time, the boutique inhaled as one. Standing at the entrance was Eli, his small hand clutched tightly in his mother's. His eyes widened at the sea of faces turned toward him, at the sight of the massive screens, the security detail, the shattered composure of the woman who had humiliated him. For a moment, he froze. Adrian turned instantly, his expression softening. He walked toward Eli and lowered himself to one knee so they were eye level. "Eli," he said gently, "I owe you an apology." Eli swallowed. "For what?" "For not being there yesterday," Adrian replied. "For letting you face cruelty alone." Eli glanced at his mother, then back at Adrian. "It wasn't your fault." Adrian gave a small, sad smile. "That's kind of you. But kindness doesn't erase responsibility." He turned to the crowd. Every person who stood by while this child was humiliated should reflect on their silence. Some faces dropped. Others flushed with shame. Adrian faced Eli again. "Your father was a hero," he said softly. "And so are you." Eli's chest tightened. No one had ever called him that before. Adrian stood and addressed the room. "Effective immediately, Montrose and Vale will undergo full corporate restructuring. Every employee will receive mandatory bias training. All security protocols will be rewritten." He paused. "And in honor of Marcus Carter, Cross Meridian Holdings is establishing a full engineering scholarship in Eli's name." Gasps echoed. Eli's breath caught. "A scholarship?" he whispered. "Full funding," Adrian confirmed. "High school programs, college tuition, research grants, anything you need to become what you dream of being." Eli stared at him, stunned. His mother covered her mouth, tears spilling freely. For the first time since his father died, Eli felt something powerful bloom in his chest, hope. Around them, the boutique buzzed with disbelief, awe, and emotional shock. Cameras recorded everything. News alerts exploded. Outside, crowds gathered, drawn by the spectacle of the helicopter, the security convoy, and now the unfolding drama. Victoria was escorted out, her face hollow, her once perfect composure shattered, her downfall complete. And standing at the center of it all was a 13-year-old boy who had walked into a watch store only wanting to look, never knowing his quiet dignity would summon a storm of justice from the sky. By sunset, the story had detonated across the world. News vans clogged Fifth Avenue. Helicopters hovered overhead. Reporters shouted questions into cameras, their voices layered with urgency and disbelief. The footage of Adrian Cross confronting Victoria Harrington looped endlessly across every major network, while Eli's face appeared on screens from Times Square to Tokyo. Headlines screamed justice and outrage in equal measure. Billionaire intervenes after child humiliated in luxury store. Power meets prejudice. A boy, a helicopter, and a lesson the world won't forget. Inside their small apartment, Eli and his mother sat on the couch, stunned, as their phone vibrated nonstop with calls, messages, and interview requests. His robotics coach left a voicemail choked with pride. Teachers sent messages promising support. Strangers flooded social media with encouragement and love. For Eli, it all felt unreal, as if his life had split into 2 distinct chapters overnight, before the store and after the helicopter. But the real shock arrived the following morning, when a black SUV pulled up outside their building and a sharply dressed woman stepped out, carrying a leather folder. She introduced herself as Adrian Cross's legal liaison. Within minutes, She had explained the terms of the scholarship, outlined Eli's future educational pathways, and delivered documentation confirming that his academic journey, from high school programs to graduate research, would be fully funded. His mother stared at the papers, hands trembling, unable to process what was unfolding. Years of worry, of sacrifice, of fear that she could never give her son enough, suddenly lifted like a crushing weight being pulled from her shoulders. Eli simply sat quietly, clutching the folder, feeling something inside him shift. Not pride. Not triumph. Something deeper. A sense of being seen. Meanwhile, the legal consequences came swiftly. Montrose and Vale's corporate offices announced a full internal investigation. The franchise license was revoked. The store was shut down pending compliance review. Within 48 hours, Victoria Harrington's termination was confirmed publicly, followed by civil lawsuits filed by Eli's family and multiple civil rights organizations. Former employees began coming forward, revealing long histories of discriminatory behavior and profiling that had been ignored for years. Customers who had once praised the boutique now boycotted it. Luxury brands severed partnerships. Within a week, Montrose and Vale became synonymous with corporate disgrace. Victoria, once admired in elite retail circles, found herself unemployable, her name permanently stained by scandal. But for Eli, the attention soon faded into the background, replaced by something far more powerful. 2 weeks later, he stood inside a massive research facility owned by Cross Meridian Holdings, eyes wide as robotic arms assembled microprocessors and engineers tested drone prototypes that danced effortlessly through the air. Adrian Cross walked beside him, hands clasped behind his back. "This is where ideas become reality," Adrian said quietly. "And I think you belong here." Eli absorbed every detail: the machines, the circuits, the massive screens streaming data in real time. For the first time, he didn't feel like a visitor peeking into a forbidden world. He felt like a future participant. That night, as Eli lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, he replayed everything that had happened. The accusation, the humiliation, the helicopter, the confrontation, the justice. He realized that the world hadn't changed because a billionaire had landed on a rooftop. It had changed because someone had finally listened, because someone with power had chosen to care, and because a boy had refused to disappear quietly. Months later, Eli returned to his robotics competition, not as a nervous participant, but as a confident innovator. His team built a drone capable of navigating collapsed buildings to locate survivors after earthquakes. Their project won national recognition. Reporters asked him how it felt to be famous. Eli simply shrugged. "I'm not famous," he said. "I'm just building things." But deep down, he carried a lesson that would shape his entire life. Dignity is not something granted. It is something inherent. Something no one has the right to strip away. On the anniversary of the incident, Adrian Cross released a public statement establishing the Marcus Carter Foundation, dedicated to providing engineering scholarships, legal advocacy, and mentorship programs for underprivileged youth. The foundation funded schools, labs, and training centers across the country, all carrying one guiding principle: talent exists everywhere, opportunity does not. And at the center of it all stood Eli, no longer the frightened boy in a hoodie, but a young engineer with fire in his mind and purpose in his heart. When asked what he had learned from the experience, Eli paused, then answered softly, "People will judge you before they know you. Some will try to shrink you. Some will try to silence you. But never let them decide who you are." His words spread as widely as the original video, touching millions who saw themselves in his story. And perhaps that was the greatest outcome of all. Because one moment of cruelty, answered by courage and justice, had become a reminder to the world that no child should ever be made to feel small, and no act of prejudice should ever go unanswered. The courtroom was packed before sunrise. News vans lined the street outside, their satellite dishes pointed toward the sky like silent witnesses. Inside, reporters filled every bench, notebooks open, cameras poised, eyes locked on the defense table where Victoria Harrington now sat, her once perfect appearance dulled by exhaustion and fear. The woman who had once commanded a luxury boutique with effortless authority now looked small, her shoulders hunched, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Across the aisle, Eli sat beside his mother, his feet barely touching the floor, his posture straight but tense. He had never been inside a courtroom before. The heavy wooden benches, the echoing footsteps, the air thick with anticipation, it all felt overwhelming. Yet beneath the nerves, there was a quiet strength growing inside him. He wasn't here to seek revenge. He was here because truth demanded to be heard. When the judge entered, the room snapped to attention. Silence fell so sharply it felt physical. The prosecutor stood, presenting the case with controlled precision, outlining the events of that humiliating afternoon: the accusation, the public search, the emotional distress, the viral footage, the corporate fallout. Each detail was supported by video, witness testimony, and internal company emails that revealed a disturbing pattern of discriminatory behavior under Victoria's management. Former employees took the stand one by one, their voices trembling as they described years of silent suffering. Customers profiled, teenagers followed, families quietly escorted out without cause. It was always the same, one associate testified. If they looked poor or different, she assumed the worst. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. It shook. Pens scribbled furiously. Then Eli was called to the stand. The room seemed to collectively hold its breath as he rose. His legs felt weak, but he walked forward anyway, guided by his mother's quiet nod of encouragement. When he was sworn in, his small hand resting on the Bible, his voice was steady. The prosecutor asked him to describe what happened. At first, his words came slowly, carefully. He spoke of curiosity, of admiration for craftsmanship, of wanting to learn. Then he spoke of accusation, of fear, of humiliation. His voice cracked only once, when he described the moment his backpack was dumped onto the floor and people laughed. "I felt like I wasn't human," he said softly. "Like I was just something to get rid of." The courtroom was utterly silent. Even the reporters had stopped writing. When he finished, the judge removed her glasses, her eyes glistening. Victoria's attorney attempted a defense, arguing company policy, security protocol, reasonable suspicion. But each claim crumbled under scrutiny. When confronted with internal emails where Victoria had referred to certain customers as problems and liabilities, her composure finally shattered. Her voice shook as she tried to explain, to rationalize, to deny. But the evidence was relentless. By the time closing arguments concluded, the outcome felt inevitable. The verdict came swiftly. Liable on all counts. Discrimination. Emotional distress. Violation of civil rights. Victoria Harrington's face drained of color as the judge read the ruling. Financial damages were awarded. Mandatory sensitivity training ordered. Her retail management license permanently revoked. But the most devastating blow came when the judge looked directly at her and said, "Your behavior did more than harm a child. It reflected a mindset that corrodes society. That ends today." Victoria bowed her head, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. For the first time, she seemed to understand the weight of what she had done. Outside, cameras exploded in flashes as Eli exited the courthouse. Reporters shouted questions, but he didn't stop. He simply held his mother's hand and walked forward, blinking against the sunlight. Later that evening, they sat together in their small living room, the television muted, news headlines scrolling endlessly. His mother turned to him. "How do you feel?" she asked gently. Eli thought for a moment. "Lighter," he said. "Like something heavy finally let go." She smiled through her tears and pulled him into a hug. Weeks later, Eli received a handwritten letter from Adrian Cross. Inside, the billionaire wrote of admiration, respect, and pride. "Your courage changed more than your own life," the letter read. It reminded the world what justice looks like. Never forget the power of your voice. Eli folded the letter carefully and placed it inside his robotics notebook, a reminder of the journey that had reshaped his destiny. Months passed. Life slowly returned to a sense of normalcy. School resumed. Robotics competitions continued. But something inside Eli had changed forever. He walked taller, spoke with greater confidence. When he saw other kids being treated unfairly, he intervened. Not with anger, but with calm resolve. He had learned that courage didn't require shouting. It required standing firm when it mattered most. On the anniversary of the incident, Eli stood before a crowd of students at a community tech center funded by the Marcus Carter Foundation. Nervous but determined, he took the microphone. "1 year ago," he said, "I walked into a store and walked out feeling invisible. But what I learned is this: when we stand up for ourselves and for each other, we become impossible to ignore." He paused, scanning the hopeful faces before him. "You don't need money. You don't need power. You don't need permission. You just need to believe that your story matters." The room erupted in applause. And somewhere, deep within the city skyline, a helicopter soared quietly across the clouds, carrying another generation of dreamers toward a future where dignity was not conditional, justice was not selective, and no child would ever again be made to feel small simply for existing. Years later, when people spoke about the moment everything changed, they didn't talk about the luxury watch store, the viral video, or even the billionaire's helicopter. They talked about a boy who refused to disappear. They talked about a child who walked through humiliation and emerged with dignity. And most of all, they talked about how one small act of injustice exposed something much bigger than a single accusation. It revealed the hidden weight carried by millions of unseen children across the world. By the time Eli Carter turned 16, his life looked nothing like the one he had known before. His once cramped apartment had been replaced by a modest but bright home filled with books, tools, circuit boards, and half-built machines scattered across every available surface. His robotics lab occupied an entire room, its walls lined with sketches, formulas, and prototypes. But despite all the changes, one thing never shifted: his humility. He still walked to school, still helped his mother cook dinner, still stayed up late tutoring kids from his old neighborhood who struggled with math and science. Because Eli never forgot where he came from, and he never allowed success to distance him from those still standing where he once stood. At 17, he earned early admission to one of the nation's most elite engineering institutes. The acceptance letter arrived on an ordinary Tuesday morning, slipped beneath the door in a plain white envelope. His mother found it first. She stood frozen in the kitchen, staring at the words, unable to breathe. When Eli walked in, she handed it to him with shaking hands. He opened it slowly, expecting nothing more than another polite rejection. But instead, the words leaped off the page. "We are proud to offer you admission." His breath caught. His knees nearly buckled. His mother burst into tears, clutching him as if she feared he might vanish. For a long time, neither of them spoke. They simply held each other, letting the weight of the moment sink in. Not long after, the news spread. Media outlets called him the boy who changed the sky. Documentaries were produced. His story became case studies in business ethics courses, law schools, and sociology departments. But Eli avoided the spotlight whenever he could. He didn't want to be famous. He wanted to build things that mattered. By 19, Eli had already designed a drone navigation system capable of locating survivors in collapsed buildings with unprecedented accuracy. Disaster relief agencies adopted his technology worldwide. Lives were saved. Families reunited. And every time someone thanked him, Eli simply smiled and said, "I just didn't want anyone to feel trapped." Those words carried layers of meaning few understood. At 21, he founded a nonprofit innovation lab in his old neighborhood, offering free engineering education, equipment access, and mentorship for underprivileged youth. Kids who had never touched a computer before were suddenly programming robots, building solar-powered devices, and dreaming beyond the limits once placed upon them. Some days, Eli would stand quietly at the back of the room, watching young minds light up with possibility. In those moments, he often thought about his father, about the sacrifice Marcus Carter had made, about the life that had been lost so another might continue. And he wondered if somewhere his father was watching, proud. One afternoon, many years later, Eli found himself standing once again outside Montrose and Vale. The boutique no longer existed. In its place stood a community technology center funded by the Marcus Carter Foundation. Sunlight streamed through the wide glass windows where luxury watches once glittered behind locked cases. Inside, children worked side by side on coding projects, drone designs, and mechanical builds, their laughter echoing through halls that had once vibrated with judgment and exclusion. Eli stood quietly on the sidewalk, hands in his pockets, absorbing the transformation. A woman passed by, pausing briefly to look at the building's plaque. "What's this place?" she asked. Eli smiled softly. "A second chance," he said. She nodded, not fully understanding, and continued on her way. But Eli understood. He understood better than anyone. That evening, he recorded a short video message for the Foundation's anniversary gala. Standing alone in the center of the lab, surrounded by half-finished inventions and glowing computer screens, he spoke directly into the camera. "There was a time when I believed the world had already decided who I was," he said calmly. "Before I ever had a chance to decide for myself. I was judged by how I looked, what I wore, and where I came from. And for a moment, I almost believed that judgment." He paused, taking a slow breath. "But I learned something powerful. Injustice only wins when we accept it. Silence only wins when we allow it. And fear only wins when we stop standing." His voice strengthened. "Every child deserves dignity. Every dream deserves a chance. And every human being deserves respect, not because they've earned it, but because they exist." The video spread quickly, touching millions, igniting conversations across classrooms, boardrooms, and dinner tables alike. In a quiet corner of the city, Victoria Harrington watched that video on her cracked phone, the volume turned low. Her life had unraveled in ways she never imagined. No luxury job would touch her. Her reputation remained permanently scarred. Each day, she worked a modest retail position far from Fifth Avenue, rarely speaking, rarely making eye contact. But something inside her had shifted. The arrogance that once fueled her decisions had been replaced by a heavy awareness. Sometimes she replayed that day in her mind, the boys' trembling hands, the silent crowd, the moment she realized she had crossed an irreversible line. And in those moments, regret burned deeper than any punishment ever could. But this story was never meant to be about her downfall. It was about Eli's rise. It was about a world forced to confront its own reflection. It was about the truth that power does not always roar. Sometimes, it whispers through the quiet courage of a child who refuses to stay silent. Years after the helicopter descended and the headlines faded, Eli returned to his old elementary school to speak to a small group of students. He stood at the front of the classroom, staring into curious eyes that reminded him of his own reflection long ago. "You don't need to be rich," he told them gently. "You don't need to be famous. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to believe that your life has meaning. Because it does. Always." One little girl raised her hand. "What if people don't listen?" she asked. Eli smiled softly. "Then you speak louder. Not with your voice, with your actions." The room fell silent as those words settled. And perhaps that was the greatest legacy of all. Not the helicopter. Not the lawsuits. Not the billionaire. But the reminder that real power begins the moment someone decides they are worthy of dignity and refuses to let anyone take it away. Because the truth is, the sky didn't change that day because a helicopter landed. It changed because a boy stood firm when the world tried to push him down. And in doing so, he lifted countless others with him. Years later, when Eli Carter was asked about the day everything changed, he never mentioned the helicopter. He never spoke about the billionaire, the lawsuits, or the media storm that followed. He always talked about the silence. The moment inside that luxury store when dozens of people stood frozen, watching a 13-year-old boy be stripped of his dignity, and said nothing. That silence stayed with him far longer than the roar of engines or the flash of cameras. Because to Eli, that silence revealed something far more powerful than cruelty. It exposed how easy it was for injustice to happen when ordinary people chose comfort over courage. He carried that memory into every room he entered. Every classroom. Every board meeting. Every laboratory. And each time he spoke not as someone fueled by anger, but as someone shaped by understanding. He understood that hatred was often born from fear. That prejudice thrived in ignorance. That cruelty survived in silence. And he believed, with everything in him, that none of those things were permanent. That they could be dismantled, slowly, painfully, deliberately, by empathy, accountability, and action. One evening, many years after the incident, Eli stood on the stage of a small community auditorium, speaking to parents, teachers, and students from the neighborhood where he had grown up. The room was modest. Folding chairs filled the floor. The walls bore hand-painted murals created by local children. No cameras. No press. No applause-hungry audience. Just people. And to Eli, that made this moment more meaningful than any international summit or televised speech. He looked out at the crowd, recognizing faces he had known his entire life. Neighbors who once shared groceries, teachers who once shared encouragement, kids who once shared broken toys and impossible dreams. When I was 13, Eli began softly, I walked into a store because I loved machines. I walked out believing that loving something didn't mean I was allowed to belong. A hush fell over the room. That day taught me something about the world, but it also taught me something about myself. He paused, breathing slowly. It taught me that my value was not defined by how others saw me. It was defined by how I chose to see myself. His voice grew steadier, and that's something no one can ever take away. He spoke about fear, about doubt, about moments when he almost believed the lies whispered by strangers. And then he spoke about resilience, about choosing to stand instead of shrinking, about choosing to learn instead of harden, about choosing compassion instead of bitterness. And as he spoke, he saw something shift in the eyes of the people listening, a quiet awakening, a reminder of their own power. After the event, a small boy approached him. The child couldn't have been more than 10. His shoes were scuffed, his shirt slightly oversized. His hands fidgeted nervously. "Mr. Carter?" he whispered. Eli knelt to his level. "Yes." The boy swallowed. "They say I don't belong in the advanced class. They say I'm not smart enough." Eli felt his chest tighten. He looked directly into the boy's eyes. "Let me tell you something," he said gently. "Belonging isn't something someone gives you. It's something you claim. And intelligence isn't measured by test scores or opinions. It's measured by curiosity, effort, and heart." The boy nodded slowly. "Do you like learning?" Eli asked. "Yeah," the boy whispered. Eli smiled. "Then you're exactly where you belong." That night, as Eli walked home through familiar streets, he passed the corner where his father used to wait after long shifts, leaning against a lamppost, tired but smiling when Eli ran into his arms. He stopped there, just for a moment, letting memory wash over him. He imagined his father standing beside him, proud, protective, unwavering. And in the quiet stillness of that moment, Eli felt something close to gratitude for even the painful chapters of his life. Because without them, he might never have understood the true meaning of justice. Justice, he realized, wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about punishment. It wasn't about power. It was about restoring dignity. About reminding people of their humanity. About refusing to let cruelty become normal. And so, Eli continued. He built. He taught. He listened. He stood up. He created opportunities where none had existed. And through it all, he carried one guiding principle, passed down from a father who had once risked everything to save another life. If you ever have the power to protect someone, use it. Because one day, that someone might change the world. And perhaps, in small ways unseen, Eli already had. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Here at Silent Pain Stories, we give a voice to the unheard, strength to the broken, and hope to those who feel invisible. Stay with us for more stories of courage, justice, and humanity.